All right, everyone, we start off today talking about Amsterdam. Yes, they've had actually too much success, and having been in Amsterdam repeatedly over the course of a half a decade, I can kind of understand why. This is Dutch News Day. Amsterdam has a problem. Its problem is the opposite of the problem of many cities in the world. Many cities have to spend money to try to attract tourists. Basically, hey, we exist. Hey, come to scenic Cleveland. They do a $500,000 ad buy and they get exactly one person stupid enough to visit, for example. Detroit and cities like that, especially older cities that are kind of, they're faltering. They have the problem of trying to attract tourists, attract businesses. Amsterdam's got the opposite problem. It is skyrocketing in population. We're talking tens of thousands of new people every year. In fact, it might even be in the six-figure range for certain years. Because the banking sector is enormous in Amsterdam. I mean, if you go to Amsterdam South, there's a whole new downtown, basically. Amsterdam basically has three different downtowns at this point. You've got massive sprawl and gentrification. Like Sloterdijk, apparently a few decades ago, was basically just a handful of houses and some fields. Now it's an enormous hipster park, basically. By the way, really fucking good pizza there available. Amsterdam North. I remember when we were looking at a place in that region, we had several options in the Amsterdam region when we wanted to move we were in Friesland briefly, and Liz wanted to move closer to her family, be in that area. We ended up moving to Diemen, which, by the way, is actually really nice. Again, it's kind of a hipsterville, a lot of students and stuff there, and all in park. But we looked at a place in Amsterdam North, and it's the perfect example of gentrification, which I personally don't see as a bad word because, it means less crime and some parks and shit like that. Art studios, hipsters and things. It's all right. But you could tell it was an area that had been fairly low rent, like working class. But then you looked at the cost and you looked at the new developments and you could tell it was quickly becoming a place to be for people that would commute probably to Centrum or something like that. And we looked at one place in Amsterdam North. It was in a decent location. It was 1,400 euros a month, right? Which probably now it's 1,800 euros a month with inflation. It might be 2,000. It wasn't even finished. It didn't even have the plumbing in it. It's like, you can move in here. And we looked at the place and it's literally just a single room, probably slightly smaller than this living room, by the way, the living room and kitchen area. A bit smaller than that with a bathroom and a closet attached to it, and that's what you got. Unfurnished. When you took the lift up to the, I wouldn't even call it a flat, really. It was a subcompact sort of semi-apartment. It was literally nothing more than an exposed scaffold with plywood flooring, for example. Wasn't even finished. It'd be 6 months, probably, before you could even technically move in and actually have any amenities. 1,400 euros a month. And that's not including any of your other stuff, by the way. Again, the water cost, the electricity, that would all have been separate, so you're looking at more than that. If you look at central Amsterdam, or south, or other parts of the city, enormous skyscrapers going up all over the place, huge housing developments. It's a sea of construction cranes, basically. Try going anywhere in the Amsterdam area, including outer Amsterdam, and find a scenic view that does not include a construction crane unless you happen to be sandwiched between enough skyscrapers that you don't have that line of sight. Even then, there's probably a construction crane. When we first moved to Diemen, the next street over wasn't even complete. It was there was a pile of construction materials in the middle of the street you couldn't even drive through. That one got done about 6 months later, and they cleaned it out, but you wouldn't believe it. They're literally banning hotels in Amsterdam to try to prevent tourists. And there's one particular class of tourists that universally seem to be panned. And there's a reason why. British tourists. Yes, Brits. They come over to go to the red light district and get drunk and then get laid. The problem is that London is a very, very short haul flight to Amsterdam. So there's really nothing they can do about it. So they're literally trying to ban hotels in order to take advantage of the fact that maybe we can slow this shit down because they've got literally too much of a good thing. Again, other cities are like, they pay a bunch of money to draw in tourists. Amsterdam has to pay money in order to keep them away because there's just too many of them. Even now, try booking a hotel room in certain parts of Amsterdam. Good fucking luck, Try getting a slot at a local restaurant that's reservation only. Maybe you'll wait a week if it's a good place. Crowded as hell. And it's a nice city. Again, Amsterdam has a lot of scenic stuff. You go to Amsterdam South, you can find a lot of parks and art sculptures and stuff. If you go to West, you're going to find all sorts of historical stuff. If you go to East, you're going to find the best food. I think Amsterdam East sort of has the vibe that I like best. If I was going to be living in Amsterdam in an urban area and I had to live in the core of the city, so within, the highway, I think I'd probably choose East over anything else. Sloterdijk would be a close second, but I think that's slightly outside of the Beltway, so to speak. Great city. Everyone should see it. I can imagine why there are so many tourists. The other part, and they're not really compensating for this, the other part is a shit ton of people simply moving in because the banking sector is expanding so fast. Amsterdam has become the banking muscle once again after the era of the Dutch Empire of all of Europe. Oh, no wonder they've got wealth running like rivers. It's sort of like, a dwarven horde or something like that, only this time the dwarves are an average of 6 feet tall. Banning hotels. I couldn't help but cover this story because I find it so funny because I literally lived there for more than a year. I've seen it myself from the time that I first came to Amsterdam. Like, this is 5-6 years ago. From that time till now, when I came into Amsterdam through Schiphol Airport a few days ago, the skyline has completely changed. Over the course of only a half a decade, the city is almost, in some areas, it's almost unrecognizable. A lot of those buildings are only a couple of years old. And they're massive. You were talking 30, 40-story structures and stuff like that. Enormous apartment developments, huge amount of new housing, fucking everything under the sun. The city is an enormous sprawl at this point. 20, 30 years ago, it was much, much more compact. A lot of those outer developments didn't really exist, including the place that we were living in. Again, in Oland Park is I don't even think a 10-year-old development. The first blocks, I think, were going up, only a few years before we moved in there. And now it's its own mini city, so to speak. It's got businesses on the bottom floor and everything. There's a plant shop and a couple of restaurants, and I think there was a salon and all of these other things right in an area that used to be nothing but farms, 15 years ago. It's incredible, actually. It's the opposite problem that a lot of U.S. cities have. A lot of U.S. cities are, like Cleveland, Detroit, they're in regression. They're shrinking or, just stagnant and, not a whole lot kicking around. This is partially because the Dutch have a much more laissez-faire business policy. Yes, believe it or not, this supposedly socialist nation that I'm sure Bernie Sanders has frequently alluded to as what we should do with regards to marijuana, especially because he wants to have a little toke. Maybe he's a Amsterdam tourist too from time to time. I'm sure he's gone to the red light district. Maybe back in the 70s, oh, this is pretty great. I mean, I prefer the Soviet Union, but this is pretty lit in the literal sense. It's very, very funny because it's actually, the business atmosphere is less regulated, more laid back, and a lot of more under-the-table sort of things than you'll find in the United States. Actually less anally retentive when it comes to authoritarian top-down government, which is, I find, absolutely hilarious. That's why they're succeeding. So yeah, the rise of a new Dutch empire, only this time it's not just mercantile vessels, it's half of Europe's banking infrastructure and literally trying to keep drunken British tourists from showing up by taking the hotels away from them. That's about all. Peace out.